Network. At the GoLocalLive Broadcast Center here at 90 Way Boston Street in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. Our all apolitical anti-Pawsox baseball fiasco crony corporatist feed at Pawtucket is Home. CoalitionRadio.us, where you'll find links and a repository of Coalition 1.0 when we were radio bound, and a link directly to our YouTube page, where you can find many of our past shows, where our shows will live like this one in perpetuity for your reference and continued amusement. So, after an hour of information about mold and home remediation, I want to point out our company sponsoring this segment, Beacon Shipping and Logistics. BeaconShippingAndLogistics.com, 1-855-3-SHIP-IT. We talked about in the first hour of Darrell Gould's company. Imagine having a company with the sophistication to handle all your home mold remediation environmental needs. Well, here we've got a company in Rhode Island, again, another company that's willing to support independent media, Beacon Shipping and Logistics, a automobile shipping company with international reach, with a local office here in Warwick, Rhode Island. They support automobile dealers around the world, but if you need your car shipped, whether you just bought something online or it's Aunt Susie's beater that you're gonna deliver to your kiddo in college, maybe you found that dealer in Wisconsin who's got that, that 75 Mustang that you want to buy it off of. Beacon Shipping Logistics, fast, effective, insured, safe automobile shipping for all your needs. 1-855-3-SHIP-IT. Joining me in studio for the very first time is someone I'm meeting for the first time tonight. But as always at the Coalition, we are impressed and look to support and give a stage to, if you will, what I call the citizen patriot. What is a citizen patriot? Someone who, in the form of truly practices public service. Someone who is someone funnier and smarter than I once said, likes to help people's lives, not get one himself. Who looks at an issue and for whatever reason that issue speaks to him or her on a very personal basis, takes that issue, embraces it, makes it their own, and advocates for a better Rhode Island for all of us. We are blessed in this state despite the chronic challenges of what Rudy Cheeks like to call halitosis hall, what I like to call mortar. We are blessed in this state with countless citizen patriots who again take an issue, bring it to the public, sometimes answering questions that we didn't even know we needed to ask, and improve the quality of not only our lives but future Rhode Islanders. Ray Berberick is just one of those people. After a lifetime of service, basically in the military as well as corporate consulting, he has chosen to embrace a role of advocacy for something called an Inspector General. We're going to talk about that tonight. We're going to talk about it on a fairly technical level. We're not going to, the guest is, as usual, probably a little bit more mature than I am. So I'll refrain from diving into my usual daggers about some of the madness that happens in Smith Hill. But clearly, this state cries out for oversight. And the oversight should not be, in my personal opinion, the oversight should not be a reaction to whatever the crisis or the, shall we say, the scandal du jour is. Too often in this state, the media, as well as our elected leaders, as well as the greater bureaucracy that exists in Rhode Island, is very reactive. They're great at after-the-fact crisis management or responding to it. We saw that this week with the training taking place for sexual harassment. It would have been nice to perhaps to identify and address those issues well before it became clear to us as Americans, whether it be in the entertainment, government, private industry, or even on the home front, that these issues had become exacerbated and difficult. Instead, as usual, we respond to the headlines. The purpose of this show is to create an environment where people can discuss about solutions that are proactive. And that's exactly what Mr. Burke is attempting to do. Welcome to the Coalition.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
The question I always ask of guests, particularly, like I said, citizen patriots like yourself, there is typically that one moment, the Einstein moment.
The aha moment.
Exactly, thank you. What was that for you? Now, your background, you're well-traveled, you're well-educated, you've served time in private industry as well as the military?
Yes.
All right. Tell us a little bit about that, and then what was your aha moment?
We had a family discussion years ago, back in the late 90s in Oklahoma, my family and I, when we were winding down the military career, and said, where do you want to retire? And we both grew up in Massachusetts, and long story short, that there was one final assignment that I did in Bristol, Rhode Island, working as an active duty advisor to the reserves in Bristol at the Quinta Gamblin Reserve Center before they turned it over to the Recreation Commission. This was back in the late 90s. And so, as luck would have it, we found an assignment in New England to be our terminal military assignment, and we settled in Portsmouth. And we were an hour away from the cousins and the grandparents, and between our two families, there's 150 relatives that we see on a regular basis. So, and that's just the blood relations. So, it was fun to come back. The grandkids got to know the grandparents, and the cousins hang out, and there we settled in Portsmouth. So after a few years, you start to feel the ebb and flow and the pulse of what's going on at the local government and at the state government level. That's this is, now that we've been in that house and in that community for 20 years now, that's the longest I've ever been anywhere. The other previous time was 4 years. That's even growing up. I've never spent more than one place in 4 years, and neither has my family until we got here. So now, having been here for 20 years, you know what's going on, as you referred to in your opening
This is home.
speech. Absolutely. And as you said, the scandal du jour, you pick up the Projo, and here's another scandal. And then you might recall that famous movie line, I'm mad as hell and not going to take it anymore.
Right.
Well, that's always was percolating just below the surface. What can, you know, actually the IG wasn't on the vocabulary then. The watershed event was when the tolls came to the Secana. And John Vitkovich, my good friend, you probably have heard of him.
No, I've met John.
Yeah,
Good guy.
he is.
Good man.
You ought to have him in here. You don't have enough time. But anyway, John put together, we were with the Portsmouth Business Association, and we put together a bunch of business owners, and up at the second floor of then Scampi's, now Locals, Plug for Locals restaurant down there in Island Park. And we had a bunch of the local East Bay legislators in there, and Jody Sullivan for the Chamber of Commerce, and a number of other folks. And we had a very nice, civilized discussion about, bottom line, why tolls were bad on the Secana. That, yes, we understand why RIDOT wants them and why the Turnpike Association, or the Bridge and Turnpike folks need it, and the state needs the money, and so on and so forth. But we were trying to get them to listen to us that you're gonna kill the local economy. Yes, you will get your toll money, but we're gonna be a ghost town. We're gonna look like some of those, like Pittsfield, Mass, where after GE pulled out, you know?
Been there.
So I won't name names, but one of the local East Bay elected said, well, look, if you get your way and the tolls don't go in, we've already programmed that revenue into the budget, so you need to come up with some ideas on how to replace that revenue. And we're sitting there going, we couldn't believe what we just heard. Wait a minute, you've already programmed that revenue and it's our job to come up with ideas to replace it? Oh, brother.
I think the term is sense of entitlement.
So that was the aha moment. So after that formal meeting, John and I and Jeannie Smith, who raised all the signatures, the 30,000 some odd signatures, and a bunch of others, we sat down and started the war game. And we said, okay, we got one list of here's the reasons why the tolls are bad, and all of it was intuitive.
Yeah.
But we actually came up with a list of a dozen recommendations of how to find additional revenue. All right, elected, we'll do your job for you. One of the ideas came from me was, let's establish an office of the Inspector General, because I was an Inspector General.
Really? Okay.
I was the IG for Fort Sill, Oklahoma from 95 to 97.
That's a significant operation.
Absolutely. And I answered directly to the two-star. And prior to becoming the IG, you go to school for 3 weeks to learn all the ins and outs of the IG system, as is codified by the U.S. Army. Now, you might know that there's several IGs levels. There, you've heard of the Department of Transportation at the federal level, or the Department of Commerce, that every federal agency has its own IG. Well, that bore out of the IG Act that was back in the 1980s,
Right.
under the Reagan administration. Well, at the same time, there was a 3-star general, Lieutenant General Treffery. In the old days, prior to the 80s, when I was a young lieutenant in the Army in Germany, the IG was the white glove guy that would come by and play, aha, gotcha, there's dust where, we haven't looked in 20 years. Okay, fine, you got me. And General Treffery had the vision to say, you know what, that's not helpful. We need to transform the IG, and he did in the 80s, and they came out with a whole new concept for the IG, which was the IGs look at systemic problems, we look for fraud, waste, and abuse, and we leave compliance up to the commanders. So we want a working, user-friendly, commander-friendly IG. And I'm sitting in class going, I can't believe, people have to know this. We gotta get the word out. And it was great because then when I became an IG, back in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, there was a number of folks, my peers, my contemporaries, who were commanding battalions. And I would see them personally and socially, and I would say, look, don't be afraid of me in my job.
This is not some internal affairs job. You're
No.
working in partnership with people.
Exactly. Before you make a big decision, if you're losing sleep over a decision, bounce it off of me. That's what I get paid for. So that's way, like you said, the key word earlier was proactive.
Right.
IGs can be proactive. Suppose a few years ago, a couple of people walked into the IG's office and said, hey, we're thinking of floating a bond issue for 38 studios. What do you think? Could it have been avoided?
My aha moment
Yeah.
was the morning that Keith Stokes worked the media airwaves around Rhode Island. Then 920 WHHA was a viable force. Did the Helen Glover show, did all the shows on WPRO all day. And I stalked him across the radio waves that day. To the point where by the 5th conversation, I got about 4 words in before I was muted.
Yep.
Which, by the way, on this show, we will never, ever, ever use what I call the tyranny of the dump or the tyranny of the mute button. And that was my aha moment because I pointed out then the complete lunacy of it. As I've spent the last 3 years alongside of a lot of very good people pointing out the lunacy of a broke state building a baseball stadium.
Well, and then even before, I remember the first couple of times that we came up Route 138 by URI and we saw the International Institute for Scholars.
Yeah.
And you know what happened there?
Yeah.
And then recently, I hate to say the name, but the Montanaro thing. I mean, what's up with that? And like you said, the scandal du jour, and you're afraid to open the newspaper or watch the news because here's another channel. That's another point, if I may cut in. Like, again, scandal du jour, proactive, and the current media. Not that I'm trying to put Bill Rappley or Jim Hummel or those guys out of business, but wouldn't it be great if the IG walked into the governor's office and said, hey, boss, we got a problem and we can head it off at the pass
Absolutely.
before it hits the TV.
Yeah.
And you've already got a solution before it blows up.
And unfortunately,
Or, even better, you see your intuition and your homework and all your professional development give you the inclination that this particular agency is fixing to do something very wrong, and you go in and tell them, don't do that, before it even bemes a mess.
so there's 2 terms I want to juxtapose them. I'm first going to ask you to define an inspector general as you envision it within the state of Rhode Island. All right, and then I'm going to ask you to compare and contrast with the general auditor's position.
Okay.
Because out there in the body politic, where folks, there are people in the bubble like myself, and now welcome to the crew, who are immersed in this. But at the same time, most folks, and I will never disparage this, most folks are at this point leading lives of quiet desperation, working 2, 3, 4 jobs to educate their children and overcome, what's the military term? Adapt, improvise, and overcome a number of the obstacles that this state places in their path to having a successful family life. So they see Auditor General. I saw Auditor General. There was a gentleman who was the Auditor General, who was gonna run for treasurer, and then he was gonna run for governor, and then he was gonna run for this. I think we all know who he is, who was the Auditor General during that period of time that you mentioned, which was 38 Studios. And I don't remember, this is me editorializing, not the guest, I don't remember the last time an Auditor General broke a scandal.
Well,
So take it from here, I don't wanna.
sure. Now, with respect to your first requirement was to define an inspector general.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you that are good on the internet, if you go to the Massachusetts Inspector General website and go down to the bottom of their homepage and look under history of the Inspector General, there is a very quick read, less than 2 minutes, and it explains what happened. Back in the 60s and 70s in Massachusetts, there was a lot of construction corruption.
Right.
It was bad. And finally, they put together what became known as the Ward Commission. And the Ward Commission came up with a conclusion that we need to create an office of the Inspector General of Massachusetts. And then, back then, the IG office then was primarily to look at construction contracts, and in a sense, ballooned out. One of the favorite sentences there, if public life relies upon spasmodic outrage to create special commissions to correct the ills of public life, then the public life is in dire shape indeed. That is why the commission created the Office of the IG. The Inspector General.
Go again, the spasmodic, that's fabulous.
Yeah. If public life relies upon spasmodic outrage to create special commissions to correct the ills of public life, then public life is in dire shape indeed.
Well, and that defines Rhode Island.
Absolutely.
These spasmodic, as I call them, crisis du jour, or collective nervous breakdowns, or outrage porn, or what I call Rhode Island politics is short attention span theater, where the late great Vincent A. Buddy Cianci once talked about vapor stories, where this week's, again, collective nervous breakdown disappears into thin air and is no longer heard from.
So a lot of the federal agencies have, well, we talked about that. The federal, almost all of the federal agencies have their own inspector general, but they answer directly to the director. And if you imagine your military wire and block diagrams, that you go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, there's a 2-star, the commanding general. He has the training center, he has the artillery school, and he also has the civilian workforce.
Right.
And he has a staff. He has the G1, 2, 3, 4, the typical personnel, the usual wire and block. He also has what's known as a special staff. It's the JAG, the chaplain, the IG, the EEO, equal opportunity. And those 4 specialists answer directly to the boss. Now, yeah, we coordinate through the chief of staff and so on and so forth.
Right.
But if I needed to, I could go to the CG's secret door and say, knock, knock, sir, I gotta see you on this.
There's an open door policy.
And you answer to the general. And so the inspector general has the gravitas that when you go in and say, open that filing cabinet and give me all of those folders and put them in this box, I need to go do some homework, you do it.
Yeah. And the corporate culture is such that for that one moment in time, from what I've read, the 2-star, who's the CEO, effectively the base,
Precisely.
is almost, not quite, but almost answering to the inspector general. There's an accountability there that exists between that they are expected to address whatever concerns you bring up.
Right. And in the military now, the military and the civilian IGs are different, but there's a lot of similarity. You know, it's like your A and B subset that circles in math from the math class from years ago. The inspector general, as we talked about, is proactive, but they also are an entity that accepts scores, if not hundreds, of allegations. And they have a codified system where you do a triage on these allegations. And then some are small potatoes, some don't belong to us. Ooh, these don't sound good. but you need to substantiate the allegations, not prove, substantiate. So there's some legal vernacular, legal process in there. If you have a substantiated allegation, and conceivably if an office of an IG was created in Rhode Island, the initial workload would be large. But then you prioritize and you say, look, this, we're going to investigate something that can potentially return $90 million or $9 million. So you get your workload organized there. You also, and as you get into, as an IG gets into beyond the substantiation of the allegation, they begin an investigation. We're looking at misspent funds somewhere. And if it's because of some old computer problems or because of no purposeful commission of criminal behavior, then the IG goes and does their thing. Once the IG discovers that there is criminal behavior or potential criminal behavior, they immediately stop and then bundle up what they found and then turn it over to the Attorney General.
Right. So, now, in the case of Massachusetts, and you do have a general auditor in Massachusetts.
Right.
In fact, I believe that's Suzanne Bump right now. And so that's distinct from the Inspector General in Massachusetts?
Yes.
Or they're the same? Okay. So now, what is here in Rhode Island, we have no Inspector General. We have a general auditor.
Correct.
And my understanding is that's an appointed position, not an elected position, appointed by the General Assembly.
Yes.
Is there an element of the proverbial, fox watching the henhouse in that position? And that's not to impugn the honesty of people who've been the auditors. I'm not going down that road.
Back in 2015, when I testified at the House Finance Committee, the chair of the Finance Committee at the hearings at the time had accepted a letter from the Attorney General that he was in favor of an Inspector General. He accepted a letter from the Superintendent of the State Police saying they were in favor, but a representative from the Auditor's office said, no, we're not. And I haven't met with them, I haven't talked with them in detail. I don't imagine we'd have a lot to agree upon. And it's nothing personal, strictly business. Right. I understand that there's an Auditor General. In fact, I've read each of their annual reports for the last 6 years, and they've made scores of recommendations. When they do their annual audit report, the back end has several recommendations on where the state can save money. But see, that's the difference between an auditor and an Inspector General, is that the Auditor General is under the Department of Administration, who then gets into the Chief of Staff, who then, here comes the annual audit report in the governor's inbox. They're gonna read it. So the IG, though, can go, hey, here's a few hot potatoes you need to know about, boss.
Right.
And now, could the governor make the Auditor General that way here? Yes. I submit to you, and then maybe you ought to have the Auditor General in here as a counterpoint. But the Auditor General and their staff, they can't grow their staff. I mean, they can ask, but they're budgeted and they're not allowed to expand and spend a lot more money to get more people. But as a minimum, on an annual basis, they must double check the budget. They look at the budget as well as the budget analysts, the House or the capital people, the House primarily, put the budget together. These folks make sure that the revenue and the expenditures balance. Right. They gotta double check that. Number two, they have to inventory all of the state assets on an annual basis. It's a lot of inventory. That's land, that's vehicles, that's a lot of work. Number three, they have to audit the pension every year. Okay?
Right.
And that's not easy, because you got daily values on those things. So you've got to make sure, in one life, that's what I did as a financial advisor. But anyway, so the Auditor General and his staff, they make sure that the left side of the balance sheet equals the right side.
Right.
They don't have the ability to look at all of the receipts to make sure that those receipts don't go to somebody's brother-in-law's construction company who happens to be sitting up in the Capitol building. They don't have the ability to ferret that out. They probably don't have the time. And if they started mousing around, they would get probably physically thrown out of the office. Whereas once an IG is created, They're in that area between the Auditor General and the Attorney General. And here's a quote from the Mass IG thing again. The Ward Commission noted that the state did have an Attorney General and a state auditor, but it found a vast middle ground between the ability to review all state transactions to a limited degree without the power to investigate, i.e. the auditor, and the power to investigate allegations of fraud on a case-by-case basis, i.e. the Attorney General. The Attorney General's office doesn't have enough time or manpower to go down and look for stuff. They need probable cause. The IG doesn't go out and beat the bushes looking for probable cause. They have an 800 number and an email inbox, and then people can anonymously go, hey, there's a guy working for the XYZ department that he's home taking naps every afternoon.
You and I are old enough to remember the term drop a dime.
Yeah, exactly.
For the millennials who may listen to this someday or in some forward time, dropping a dime, right, man, there was something called a payphone.
Yes.
Where you paid for it for years with a dime.
Exactly.
You dropped a dime into the payphone and you called and, well, dropped a dime on somebody. So that function doesn't exist. So you're actually taking this from a very, I'll call it a polite role. You're not looking like so many of us do, because some of us are kind of cynical at this point. You're not looking at the Auditor General as a quote-unquote failure. You're looking at the Auditor General's other responsibilities and seeing really not within the line of command that he or she establishes this proactive anti-fraud force,
Right.
anti-fraud reporting force. At the same time, the Attorney General is one to prosecute the crime, but at the same time is not maintaining a vast staff of people who act as a reporting mechanism. So what you're saying is that the military, and in many cases most governmental organizations, create this body which can ferret out and do the surface value reporting on potential conflict of interest, potential crimes, issues, wastes, any one of a number of issues.
Right.
What's been the reaction? Now, you've been at this for a little while now.
Going back to the toll story, so once John Vitt has a lot of connections, and he was able to get a bunch of business owners and a number of us with Senator Ordiano at the time and Rep. Jay Edwards, and we actually had a meeting with Governor Chafee in November of 2012, and we gave him two lists, the lists that we made. Here's why the tolls are bad. Here's some ideas on how to find the revenue to replace what you were expecting for the toll revenue. And then the spring of 2013 came, and I was asked to testify, well, not asked, I mean, we were all up there in room 35 testifying why the tolls weren't bad. And I basically outlined the recommendations, and at the time, then Rep. Valencia was on the Finance Committee. So when he heard me say, create an office of the Inspector General, I didn't know it at the time, but he was the sponsor for the House IG bill that year. He, after I testified, came over and introduced himself and said, look, we need to talk, and long story short, he enlisted me to help him, and then also in the spring of 2013, I testified for his IG bill in room 35. And then he did it for 2013 and 14, and then Rep. Dan Riley did it for 2015. 2016, there wasn't much stomach for it. It was kind of quiet. And then last year, Rep. Lancia was leading the charge.
Right.
But this year, I have to admit that we actually had a quick meeting the other night where there were 4 Democratic representatives in a little post-session meeting on, okay, let's get organized, let's organize our thoughts, we're gonna prepare a couple of briefings, we're gonna do our homework, and we're going to put together a nice package to show the right people why we think it's a good idea, and there's some legislative support.
Right. I mean, one need only look at the abuses that were uncovered as part of the legislative grant program under the former House Finance Committee's chairman's watch to understand the need and how cost-effective this could be. Has anyone pointed out any conflicts between, is there a fear that the agency could become, perhaps in an alternate reality, considering this is Rhode Island, too strong? Or how does one temper, if you will, the reach, so that it does not become a politically charged environment?
Yeah, that's one of those. The answer is trust me answers. Having walked in those shoes, once I became the Inspector General, my social life went to hell. But no, I wasn't more powerful than the CG. I wasn't more powerful than the Chief of Staff. I wasn't more powerful than the school commander or the brigade commanders.
Right.
All of my work was in the background. But all you had to do was, in the office, is get somebody saying, you need to follow rules, because if the IG ever finds out, that's what you want.
Right. You want to instill a little fear of God there.
Yeah, I mean, you should be doing it anyway, but, humans are humans.
Exactly. Now, is this under the legislation that you've submitted in the past? Is this an appointed position, an elected position? And where do they report directly to?
It's appointed. For example, in Massachusetts, it's the governor, the attorney general, and the auditor general appoint an IG for 5 years. And as the history that they've had one guy do it for 5, and then the second term, and that's it. Pretty much after 10 years of seeing the bad news,
Right.
time to move on.
Right.
But that's how it's done. Other states are different. There's 12 states with IGs. One thing I'd like to mention in that regard is, and it's interesting to note, we have some statistics that you can go to the National Association of State Budget Officers. So
That must be quite a party.
Oh yeah. And they put together an annual report, and it shows where states are all spending their money. And they also list in nice forms, in tabular form, an Excel spreadsheet, how much each state has spent each year over the last 3 years. So you pick any year, you throw it into Excel, you do your average, and then you sort it from highest to lowest, and you look, and unfortunately Rhode Island is spending about 50% more per capita than the national average.
It's a study, and please don't hold me to these numbers. Just yesterday, there was an analysis of Governor Jerry Brown's last budget in California, and it was something to the tune of $190 billion,
Right.
which is a breathtaking amount of money. But then you realize it's California.
Right, which has 39 million people.
Right. So a 190 versus 9, and
Cali's right at the national average. They spend about $6,700 a head per
Right.
person.
right.
The national average is right around 6,700.
Right.
Rhode Island's close to 9,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at that list, and we're pretty much near the top with a
Yeah.
bullet. With a bullet.
One of the lists, we're at the top.
And you really have to get into a state, some of the more interesting states like Alaska,
Yeah,
Wyoming,
there's a
and
story
Delaware.
behind each one, but the ones highlighted in yellow here, those are the ones that have IGs.
Interesting.
The state of Florida, down at the bottom, no matter how you slice it, they have the least spending per capita. You wouldn't think that would be the case. They don't have a state inspector general. They, like the federal government, have 26 state level IGs.
Wow.
The Department of Education, the Department of Justice, Department of Corrections, Department of Transportation, 26 separate state level IG offices in Florida. And they only spend about $3,800, almost half per capita. Why? Because there's people looking at what's going on with state spending on a regular basis.
And they're literally spending a third per capita of what we're spending.
Absolutely.
That's breathtaking.
And think of the challenges down there with the folks from the South,
You've got immigrant,
Latin America,
you've
all
got
the
immigrant
countries,
issues,
and the retiree community. I mean, that is a challenging state to run.
Right. You've got very challenging urban areas surrounded by wide
Everything,
swaths of agriculture.
storms,
I mean, lions and tigers and bears.
storms,
I mean, in
the whole 9
Florida.
yards, yeah.
Yeah.
So I hope I've answered your questions.
No. This is outstanding. So in this case, who would the IG? This was an appointed position. The legislation that you promoted in the past and will continue to promote envisions where is their direct report to? Is it a direct report
Governor.
to the governor?
If I were king, here's 2 things I would do if I were king. Now, there's some folks that have suggested, let's put it under the attorney general. No, under the Auditor General, no, under the Lieutenant Governor, no. The IG is a special staff officer that works for the governor.
Right.
And it's not a power play. I wish I could convince people of that.
Right.
That once they get their inbox and they get working, you won't see them. If you're appointed the IG, you'll be lucky to see them because they will be so busy. But what they do is, for example, last year and 2 years ago, the state of Pennsylvania, their Inspector General, found $87 and $94 million in misspent welfare funds. They made corrections. They're not making that mistake again. Fundamentally, you just saved $87 million.
Right.
State of Massachusetts, back in 2012, they said the whole Medicaid program is being done wrong. If you make these recommendations, you will save the state $230 million.
Wow.
We have $9 billion in this state. And then just done this, again, that's not a panacea, that's not a smoking gun. That's to say, whoa, our spending is way more. It's not incrementally more, it's significantly more than the national average. Why? And let's do a reverse engineer that and run that rabbit down the hole.
Right, and it's clear that if you don't have the statutory authority, you don't have the authority. I hearken back to Governor Carcieri's first administration, in which he talked about the big audit. And to most people, one of the great unanswered questions of that era is, whatever happened to the big, the big audit? And it strikes me that they simply didn't have the line authority, I should say, to really enforce anything they might have found from the big audit. Flash forward a couple of years, Ken Block, in his, who's got a significant amount of expertise in health and human services expenditures.
Yeah, that's right. His report.
Right, was a very, very successful entrepreneur. And again, someone that I would consider a citizen patriot to the extreme. Ken Block has managed to invest countless thousands of hours of his own and his staff's time at his own personal expense, and at the same time continues to receive the unrelenting ire of many of our state officials, when in fact someone like him would probably be the ideal Inspector General, in so many ways.
Well, actually, the other thing. So if I were king, I would make sure that the IG, now they can have a 2-person, 3-person, or a 5-person group. In fact, most states actually have an Inspector General Council. So the IG doesn't go and eat up a lot of the governor's time, but the IG goes in and says, okay, here's the 20 or 30 or 40 cases I'm working on. What do you folks think? And then there's kind of like a sanity check. Okay, why don't we change the priorities? Don't bother with that one, and so on. Plus the 12 state IGs can all share information. Hey, they've got a network. We just did an investigation here. You want some savings? You might want to look over there. We found something new. The second thing I would do for the very first time, let's say it's 5 years term, is I would go find a retired Army general, someone that's used to being, that aura, that personality.
Right.
Also, that particular general should have been an IG at one time, and they must not come from Rhode Island. They can't know anybody in this state.
Oh my God, hired from out of state.
The reason being is that the sole purpose of that thought is because that general will set up, establish, and initially operate and groom the way that IG procedures are supposed to be done. So if someone comes in and says, hey IG, I need you to go find some dirt under somebody's fingernails, you chuck them right out of the office, right out the second floor window.
Right.
Get out of here, we don't do that.
Yeah, you're not the opposite.
And then that way, someone with enough gravitas that can say, no, that's not how the IG works, get out of here.
No, that's an interesting component. One of the challenges in Rhode Island is when public officials are dealing with other public officials, it's not Senator Jones, it's Billy, who I played hockey with at, fill in the name of the high school or college.
Well, that's a challenge here in a small state. Yeah.
Right, I mean, where you have zero degrees of separation.
Right.
That's an astonishingly sharp way to look at things. The role of the state police in the state, again, my opinion, not the opinion of my guests, is subtly becoming more politicized.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
Right. So which is sad because there were dominant state police leaders
They were the standard bearer.
who clearly articulated a vision for the state police to be independent. In its current iterations, that seems to have been weakened.
It will pass in time. Things are cyclic. Everything in life is cyclic, ups and downs. So they'll recover.
So yeah, and it just remains.
They
to be
personally have not had a scandal. They've just been caught in the crossfire.
Well, and weakened systems because I'm a sales personality, so I'm the last person to speak. Someone like yourself, who's a who believes in systemic analysis for the sake of systemic analysis, clearly can articulate a vision where that acts as a prohibitive, a fence, an electric fence, if you will,
Right.
from allowing these type of abominations to occur. And you're not going to get all of them, but quite frankly, when you look at, and I'm just going back, I'm a cynic, but going back from everything from DEPCO to the parking violations bureau scandal, 25 years ago, to the overruns on the bridges that were built, I just go on and on and on. The Commerce Corporation gone mad, loaning money to companies who clearly. Here's a little trivia for you, by the way. There is a transparency website, which I'm going to publish actually on the coalition page, that was created, I believe, during the Chafee administration, where the current status of debt issued by Rhode Island to people, from 38 Studios on to Capco Steel to some successes probably, was updated routinely. Do you know that site has not been updated since before 2014?
Wow.
The site's still out there, and we're gonna publish that to people because we need to understand if we're looking at an administration that clearly believes in legally feathering the nest of private corporations with little or no accountability as to success by loaning them millions of dollars. Right now, there is no public analysis of where the currently invested debt stands. There is also little or no post-bonding analysis of where that money has been spent or where that money stands. There's two groups of people who seem to get away with I'll call it a sense of collective amnesia. Weathermen, who, the day after the weather is passed, I love weathermen, but we conveniently forget their miscues. Okay, that's usually in good faith. As a state, I'm a libertarian. In the last run-up, and we're going to discuss this again, in the last General Assembly race where we ran a handful of libertarian candidates, and they did astonishingly well, great candidates. My prior guest was one of them. We advocated for every year at election time, when new bonds were being proposed, a look back, if you will, on the status of the prior 3 elections bonds issues, where they stood, where they'd been spent, a topside analysis as part of the package with a link to a website, the beauty of the web, all right, a link to a website with a really hardcore breakdown of where that money was spent. Because in Rhode Islanders, again, short attention span theater, we approve all these bonds, and I'm someone who pays attention. I couldn't tell you what those bonds were in the last election. Most people couldn't. That all of that is part and parcel of just good business practices. Why people like you need to be in charge of the hen houses that people like me are. that sort of accountability, that there is a I hate to use the term watchdog, but there is a body out there whose existence really is created to simply make existing systems better and to prevent mistakes.
Right. You caused the thought. I wanted to underscore this for those that are observing, is the IG does not go on witch hunts, and they do not investigate people. So if an allegation come in that Representative so-and-so is abusing animals at home,
Right.
sorry, it's not for us to investigate.
Right. On the other hand, if there is a flow of funds from a project that...
Well, one that Rep. Morgan dug up today, did you see it?
Yeah.
The original $1 million viaduct contract is now $33 million.
Can I quote the late great Jim Neighbors?
Sure.
Surprise,
Surprise.
surprise,
Yeah.
surprise.
Absolutely.
The two dirtiest words in government language weren't the ones uttered by our president today or yesterday.
Let's not go there.
The two dirtiest words are change order. You know, those are words that somehow need to be, if it were all possible, eliminated from the human language being used in conjunction with each other.
Right.
Change orders are the devil.
One thing that I've talked to the representatives about, and hopefully a word will get back to the speaker, is one of the more successful things that I've seen come out of the state capitol, in my mind, in the last, well, say 5-6 years that I've been involved up there, was the infrastructure commission that we had in the fall of 2013. Because we had the initial reaction to the tolls in 2012, the first testimony and the rhubarb was in 2013.
Right.
And then there was all of that midnight madness that happened the last week of the budget that usually happens, and we ended up with the 10-cent toll, but that was a placeholder.
Right.
And then we had the infrastructure commission, which met 6 times, 3 reps, 3 senators, and we had a bunch of people testify. I did, Darlington from Turnpike, Mike, trying to blank, the previous Right Eye.
Right.
And
Gentleman from Boston.
right, and everybody had a chance to put their cards on the table. And one of the things we said was, Mike Lewis.
Right.
And what he actually came down to that meeting at Scampy's back in 2012, and he gave his side of the story. And, you know, they said, well, you know, there's X number, they get an Excel spreadsheet with like 750 bridges that are considered bridges by definition, not a culvert, so on. But he said like 400 of them are structurally deficient. You can drive over them, but they're structurally deficient in their terminology. So the get well number was 400 million. Then when we went a couple of months later, the get well number was 600 million. Then in the infrastructure commission in the fall of 2013, he said, yeah, we need 1.1 billion to get all of the roads and bridges well in this state. Okay, be that as it may, and that's when kudos still to Senator De Palma, Senator then Odiano, and Rep. Jay Edwards. The 3 of them put together one of the more creative pieces of legislation that came out that said, okay, we're gonna take a little bit of here, a little bit of money there. We do have the money in-house, and as long as you create a restricted receipt fund and make sure that those monies are in fact spent on road and bridge maintenance, we do have a solution, and we did it in-house without raising tolls.
And that's always been, you know, Bob Lancia has been on the show several times.
Yes.
Great guy.
Yep.
Actually, the two of you probably hit it off. Probably.
Yes. we're simply simpatico.
Exactly. One of Rep. Lancia's complaints is the notion that for example, we got the infamous 9/11 tax, 911 tax,
yeah.
you know, which doesn't get spent on 911 systems. It's fundamental to and why this is so important. We suffer from a malaise here in this state, increasing bitterness, and I'm the prime example of all things government. Positions like this, after quite honestly, probably a fairly difficult birthing process, will instill in citizens a bigger sense of trust, a bigger sense of confidence, maybe do away with some of this dark gallows humor that all Rhode Islanders seem to suffer from.
That'll be a couple of generations.
Right, but at the same time, also as a libertarian, limit the growth of government because, frankly, to me, the question that should always be asked when one of these great ideas comes along from government is that within our purview? Is that within our role? Is that our job? Is financing a baseball stadium part of what government's supposed to be doing? Is financing a game studio? You know?
Yeah.
I mean, and if those ideas and those issues are addressed by this, we will, you talk about break glass, pull down the emergency hammer. You have the potential almost overnight to see an improvement in people's attitude, a trust in the notion that things are being done for the right reason. And that would, I believe, would be incalculable in repositioning Rhode Island for success moving forward. Incalculable.
Right. The IG is, you cannot guarantee that they're gonna find money, but I'd say the odds are pretty good. And
I'm thinking, what's the words now? I'm not a military person, but target-rich environment?
absolutely. And the Brookings Institution actually did a survey of inspectors general at the federal level, and other than the IRS, which collects money for the government, but the IG as an entity has a 13-to-1 return on investment.
Right.
So for every dollar spent, they find 13. That's a general, it's not a given, but it's a general thing.
No, absolutely.
And some people, it's interesting, some of the initial knee-jerk reactions, oh, you're gonna create more government and it's gonna get wrapped up in a bureaucracy. No, the IG doesn't get in the way of legislation. They come in, they say, give me that filing cabinet, that drawer full of folders, we're gonna borrow them for a couple of weeks and then we'll bring them back. They don't get in the way. They don't slow anything down. And one thing which reminded me, if those of you inclined, again, to support the Auditor General, is the state website, go to the Auditor General, annual reports, and then, I'm not saying read the whole thing or each of the reports, but look at the table of contents, and then towards the end of each report is a list of recommendations on where the state can save money. And if you look at those for each year for the last 5 years, it could have a V8 moment. So.
Right. Yeah, no,
So
absolutely.
they do good work, but it gets buried in the bureaucracy, which is why the IG needs to work for the governor.
It's all about the mission, but also how the mission is exacted.
Exactly.
It's excellent. Well, again, my hat's off to you for being one of those citizen patriots who are trying to make people's lives better simply because it's the right thing to do. Folks like yourself are just invaluable, and the efforts and so many of the people that you mentioned, Jonathan, all those folks, again, as tough as some of the challenges we're going to face this year are, I can't imagine what this state would be like without folks like yourself who are willing to continually step up. So my hat's off to you. Congratulations on the job may not be complete, but I believe firmly, after having looked through your paperwork and just had some conversations, the moment is here.
That's why we captured the buzz phrase that an idea whose time has come.
Absolutely. Well, Ray Berberick, congratulations.
Thank you
for all your hard work.
Great to meet you.
Thank you for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
This has been wonderful. And I hope you'll put us on your communications chain.
Absolutely.
Keep us involved, and we'll have you in from time to time just to kind of report on things as they progress. And let's, as a state, collectively just move this idea forward.
Love that.
Excellent. Ray Berberick, he of course let's talk about where we can find you on social media. Is IG_in_RI, correct?
Correct. Well, I created on WordPress a very simple website that has all of the information that we talked about and more. It's got links to the Capital TV clips of my testimony. It's got the Jim Hummel interview, and now you guys will be up there soon. The website is www.iginri.wordpress.com.
Right.
And then there's a Facebook page, need an IG, and a Twitter account for those of you that are so inclined.
Excellent.
And then actually it's easy to just go to Rep Morgan or Rep Lancia, and then he always retweets everything that I put. But I go about a couple times a day, I'll scroll through Twitter, and then boom, here comes one of those headlines, and it said, "Oop, if we had an IG, they might have prevented this kind of thing," or "This is a good thing for the IG to look at, and they should look at these in other areas or agencies."
Make sure you tag us on that. So
Absolutely, will do.
We can help amplify. Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Folks, we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Media Network, here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Boston Street, in the heart of the city we love. There's only an hour left to go. Joining us in a few minutes, Senator Nick Kettle, the lone voice of legislative reason in the Senate Finance Committee this week, in this week's seminal vote passing and moving the Pawsox legislation out into the Senate floor for vote this week. We'll talk about that in a second. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the Mighty Mighty Twitter at Coalition_Radio, CoalitionRadio.us, where we've archived our older radio broadcasts and where links to our YouTube page, where this and other broadcasts will continue to live in perpetuity for your education and entertainment value. Folks, stay tuned. We'll be back in just a couple of moments. I'm going to have a Yacht Club soda. We're going to reflect on a couple of things before we bring Senator Kennel on the air. We'll be right back.